The spaceship landed behind the old oak trees just as the sun was setting. Nobody saw it happen because it was invisible to human eyes. But if you could have seen it, you would have noticed a tall, graceful figure stepping out onto the soft grass. Her name was Zara, and she was not from Earth. She came from a planet so far away that even the strongest telescopes couldn't find it. Her home world was called Kepler 440b, and it was nothing like Earth. There were no dogs, no cats, no birds singing in the morning. The people there communicated mostly through thoughts and gentle hand gestures. Zara looked exactly like a human woman now, thanks to special technology that changed her appearance. Her real form was quite different, with skin that shimmered like starlight and eyes that could see colors humans had never imagined. But for the next 6 months, she would look and sound just like any other person walking down the street. She was here on a very important mission. The leaders of her planet had chosen her to study human behavior and learn about Earth's customs. They wanted to understand how humans lived, what made them happy, and how they treated each other. Zara was perfect for this job because she had always been curious about other worlds and other ways of life. Standing in the quiet field, Zara felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had spent years studying humans from far away, watching their movies and TV shows that somehow reached her planet through space. She had read their books and learned their languages, but reading about something and actually living it were two very different things. Her first challenge came right away. She needed to find the small college town where she would be staying. The university had agreed to host her as part of an exchange program. Though they thought she was from a very distant and private country, her cover story was simple but believable. As she walked through the town's main street, everything seemed both familiar and strange. The buildings looked just like in the pictures she had studied, but they felt different somehow. There were smells in the air that she had never experienced before: fresh bread from a bakery, coffee from a small cafe, and something sweet that turned out to be ice cream. People walked past her on the sidewalk, some alone, some in groups. They were talking and laughing, completely unaware that an alien visitor was walking among them. Zara found their casual interactions fascinating. On her planet, every conversation was formal and planned. Here, humans seemed to chat about anything and everything. She noticed how they used their hands when they talked, how their voices went up and down with emotion, and how they sometimes said things that didn't match their facial expressions. It was like watching a complex dance that everyone knew the steps to, except her. The university campus was beautiful, with old brick buildings covered in green vines and young students hurrying between classes. Dr. Maya Rodriguez, her assigned cultural guide, was waiting for her at the main entrance. Dr. Rodriguez was a professor of anthropology who specialized in cultural exchange programs. "Welcome to Earth," Dr. Rodriguez said with a warm smile, though she had no idea how literally true those words were. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." Zara almost laughed at the question. If only she knew that the journey had taken her across 17 galaxies and through 3 different dimensions. Instead, she simply smiled and said, "It was quite an adventure." Dr. Rodriguez showed her around the campus, pointing out the library, the student center, and the various academic buildings. Everything was so different from the crystal structures and floating platforms of her homeworld. These buildings seemed so solid and permanent, built to last for centuries. "The students here are very friendly," Dr. Rodriguez explained as they walked. "They come from all over the world, so you'll fit right in. Don't worry if some of their expressions seem strange at first. Young people have their own way of talking." This comment made Zara's heart beat faster with excitement. She had prepared for this by studying human languages, but she knew that real conversations would be nothing like her textbook examples. She was eager to learn how humans really communicated with each other. Her apartment was small but comfortable, located just a few blocks from the campus. It had everything she needed: a bed, a desk, a kitchen, and even a small television. The walls were painted a soft blue color that reminded her of the sky on her home planet. During the peaceful season, that first night, Zara sat by her window looking out at the street below. She watched humans walking their dogs, couples holding hands, and children playing in a nearby park. Each scene was like a puzzle piece that would help her understand this fascinating species. She pulled out a small device that looked like a smartphone, but was actually an advanced recording and analysis tool. She began making notes about everything she had observed that day. The way humans greeted each other with handshakes or hugs, how they looked into each other's eyes when they talked, and how they seemed to express emotions so openly on her planet. Feelings were kept private and controlled, but here she had seen people laugh loudly, hug spontaneously, and even cry openly. It was both beautiful and confusing to someone from her very different world. As she prepared for bed, Zara felt confident about her mission. She had studied human behavior for years, and she was ready to learn even more. She had no idea that some of the most important lessons would come from the most unexpected and embarrassing mistakes. The next morning would bring her first real interactions with college students, and with them, the beginning of a misunderstanding that would change everything she thought she knew about human communication. Zara's first week at the university was like stepping into a whole new world. Every morning, she would walk across the campus and watch students rushing to their classes, coffee cups in hand, backpacks slung over their shoulders. The energy was infectious, and she found herself smiling at the organized chaos of college life. She had enrolled in several classes as part of her cover story, including Introduction to Human Psychology and Cultural Studies. But her real education was happening outside the classroom, in the hallways, cafeterias, and common areas where students gathered to talk. The student center became her favorite place to observe human behavior. It was like a busy marketplace of ideas, emotions, and conversations. Students would sit in groups, sharing stories, complaining about professors, and discussing everything from weekend plans to philosophical questions about life. Zara had a special device that looked like regular earbuds, but was actually a universal translator from her home planet. It could understand any human language and translate it instantly. What she didn't realize was that this advanced technology had one major flaw. When it came to Earth languages, it was designed to translate everything literally, word by word, without understanding the cultural context or hidden meanings. On her fourth day, she was sitting in the corner of the student center with a notebook, pretending to study while actually listening to conversations around her. 3 students at a nearby table were having an animated discussion about their weekend plans. "I'm so tired of studying," said Jessica, a psychology major with curly red hair. "I just want to relax and have some fun." "Tell me about it," agreed Tyler, who was majoring in engineering. "I've been in the library for 3 days straight. I need to blow off some steam. Maybe we should go to that party at the Delta House," suggested Katie, flipping her long brown hair over her shoulder. "I heard it's going to be wild." Zara was fascinated by their casual way of talking. On her planet, conversations were formal and structured. Here, humans seemed to jump from topic to topic, using expressions she had never heard before. She wrote down phrases like blow off steam and wild party to research later. Then Tyler leaned in closer to his friends and lowered his voice slightly. "Speaking of parties, did you hear about what happened to Brandon last weekend? He finally got lucky with that girl from his chemistry class." "Really?" Katie's eyes widened with interest. "I didn't think he had it in him." "Yeah, apparently they went back to her place after the party. Let's just say they spent the whole night trying out different positions. You know, missionary, cowgirl, doggy style, the works." Zara's translator immediately got to work, processing each word. It understood missionary as someone who spreads religious beliefs. Cowgirl translated as a woman who works with cattle. But doggy style was the phrase that really caught her attention. Her translator processed it as 2 separate words, doggy meaning related to dogs, and style meaning a way of doing something. Combined, her advanced alien technology concluded that this must be some sort of human practice involving acting like dogs. Zara was intrigued. She had studied human relationships with animals and knew that dogs held a special place in human society. They were called man's best friend and were often treated like family members. Perhaps this doggy style was some sort of spiritual or cultural practice, where humans honored their connection to these beloved animals. The more she thought about it, the more it made sense to her. Humans seemed to have rituals for everything. They had ceremonies for graduating school, getting married, and even celebrating birthdays. Why wouldn't they have a special practice that honored their relationship with dogs? She started paying closer attention to conversations, and to her surprise, she heard the phrase mentioned several more times over the next few days. In the gym, the students were talking about their relationships. In the library, she overheard someone whispering to their friend about their weekend plans, even in her psychology class. When the professor was discussing human behavior, a student made a joke that included the phrase. Each time she heard it, Zara became more convinced that this was an important aspect of human culture that she needed to understand. The fact that people talked about it in hushed tones made her think it might be some sort of sacred or private ritual. That evening, she went to the campus bookstore and found herself in the pet section. She picked up books about dog training, dog behavior, and the history of human-dog relationships. The store clerk, a friendly student named Alex, noticed her selection. "Getting a new puppy?" Alex asked with a smile. "Something like that," Zara replied, not wanting to reveal her true purpose. "I'm trying to understand the deeper connection between humans and dogs." "That's really cool," Alex said. "Dogs are amazing. They're so loyal and loving. Some people say they can teach us a lot about how to live." This comment only reinforced Zara's belief that she was on the right track. If dogs could teach humans how to live, then surely doggy style was about learning from these wise creatures. She spent the next few days reading everything she could find about dog behavior. She learned about pack dynamics, how dogs communicate with body language, and the importance of establishing dominance and submission in dog relationships. She studied how dogs greeted each other, how they played, and how they showed affection. Her apartment became filled with dog-related books and materials. She had guides on dog training, books about different breeds, and even some DVDs about canine behavior. She was determined to master this important aspect of human culture. But there was still so much she didn't understand. How exactly did humans practice doggy style? Was it something they did alone or with others? Was it a daily practice or something special for certain occasions? She decided she needed to do more research. She started visiting the local dog park, watching how dogs interacted with each other and with their human companions. She observed their movements, their playful behavior, and the way they communicated without words. The dog owners at the park were friendly and happy to talk about their pets. They shared stories about their dogs' personalities, their favorite games, and their unique quirks. Zara listened carefully, taking mental notes about everything she learned. One afternoon, while watching a group of dogs playing together, she noticed how they would sometimes get down on all fours and play fight in a very specific way. This had to be it, she thought. This must be the foundation of the human practice she had been hearing about. She began to practice in the privacy of her apartment, getting down on her hands and knees and trying to mimic the movements she had observed. It felt strange at first, but she was determined to understand this important human ritual. Little did she know that her earnest research was leading her toward the most embarrassing misunderstanding of her entire mission to Earth. Zara's research had taken on a life of its own. Her small apartment now looked like a shrine to dogs. Books about canine behavior were stacked on every surface, and she had printed out dozens of articles about human-dog relationships. She was convinced that mastering doggy style would be the key to understanding human culture. Every morning, she would wake up early and practice what she thought were the proper movements. She would get down on her hands and knees and try to move the way she had seen dogs play at the park. It was harder than it looked, and she often found herself losing her balance or feeling awkward. She had bought a small mirror and placed it in her living room so she could watch herself practice. She studied her posture, trying to make it look more natural and graceful. On her home planet, physical exercises were done floating in the air. so moving around on all fours was completely new to her. The neighbors in her apartment building started to notice strange sounds coming from her. Unit Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived next door, would often hear bumping and shuffling sounds at odd hours. She mentioned it to her husband during breakfast one morning. "That new girl upstairs is doing something strange," she said, sipping her tea. "I hear her moving furniture around all the time, and sometimes it sounds like she's jumping or something." Her husband chuckled. "Maybe she's doing some kind of exercise routine." Young people these days are always trying new fitness trends. If only they knew that Zara was actually practicing what she believed was an ancient human ritual. INVOLVING canine movements. She had no idea that her innocent preparation was creating such a mystery for her neighbors. Zara decided she needed to expand her research beyond just books and observation. She visited every pet store in town, asking detailed questions about dog behavior. The store employees were always happy to help, thinking she was preparing to adopt a dog. "I'm particularly interested in how dogs communicate with each other," she would say, taking careful notes. "Can you tell me more about their body language and social interactions?" One store owner, a kind man named Robert, was especially helpful. He had been working with dogs for over 20 years and knew everything about their behavior. "Dogs are fascinating creatures," he explained to Zara one afternoon. "They have this whole language of movements and sounds that most people don't even notice. When they play, they use specific postures to show they're being friendly and not aggressive." Zara's eyes lit up. This was exactly what she needed to know. "Can you show me some of these postures?" Robert demonstrated a few basic dog positions, getting down on his hands and knees to show her how dogs would bow to invite play, or how they would position themselves. During different types of interaction, Zara watched carefully, memorizing every detail. "This is incredibly helpful," she said, genuinely grateful. "I had no idea human culture had such deep connections to canine behavior." Robert looked at her with a puzzled expression. "Human culture? I'm not sure I follow." Zara realized she had said too much. "Oh, I'm writing a research paper about the relationship between humans and animals. It's for my anthropology class." This explanation seemed to satisfy Robert, and he continued sharing his knowledge about dog behavior. He even lent her some training videos that showed different dog breeds and their unique characteristics. Back in her apartment, Zara studied these videos like they were ancient texts containing sacred knowledge. She practiced the movements she saw, trying to perfect each position and gesture. She learned to make different sounds that dogs use to communicate. From gentle whines to playful barks, the practicing wasn't easy. Her knees would get sore from crawling around on the floor, and she often bumped into furniture. But she was determined to master this important aspect of human culture. She believed that understanding Doggy style would give her deep insights into how humans related to each other and to the animal world. Dr. Rodriguez noticed that Zara seemed to be spending a lot of time researching animal behavior. During one of their weekly check-in meetings, she mentioned this observation. "I see you've been very interested in our relationship with pets," Dr. Rodriguez said, looking at the stack of dog-related books Zara had brought with her. "That's actually a fascinating area of study. The bond between humans and dogs goes back thousands of years." Zara nodded eagerly. "Yes, I've been learning so much about it. I think it's a very important part of human culture that doesn't get enough attention." "You're absolutely right," Dr. Rodriguez agreed. "Many anthropologists believe that our relationship with dogs helped shape human society in fundamental ways. Dogs taught us about loyalty, cooperation, and even some forms of communication." This conversation made Zara even more confident that she was on the right track. If a respected professor was talking about how dogs influence human society, then surely Doggy style was a legitimate cultural practice worth studying. She decided to take her research to the next level. She started visiting the local animal shelter, volunteering to help with the dogs. The staff there were amazed by her dedication and her eagerness to learn about canine behavior. "I've never seen someone so committed to understanding dogs," said Linda, the shelter coordinator. "You have a real gift for connecting with them." Zara spent hours at the shelter, observing how different dogs interacted with each other and with humans. She noticed how some dogs were more dominant while others were more submissive. She saw how they used their body language to communicate their feelings and intentions. She even started bringing a small notebook to record her observations. She drew diagrams of different dog positions and wrote detailed notes about their meanings. To anyone watching, she looked like a serious researcher studying animal behavior. But her most intense practice sessions happened in the privacy of her apartment. She would spend hours each evening getting down on all fours and practicing the movements she had observed. She worked on her posture, her balance, and even the sounds she made. She had bought a collar from the pet store, thinking it might be some sort of ceremonial item used in the human practice of doggy style. She would wear it during her practice sessions, believing it helped her connect with the spiritual aspects of the ritual. The collar was simple but well made, with a small bell that would jingle softly when she moved. She liked the sound because it reminded her of the gentle chimes used in meditation practices on her home planet. One evening, while practicing in her living room, she heard a knock at her door. She quickly took off the collar and hid it under a cushion before answering. It was Mrs. Chen from next door, holding a plate of homemade cookies. "I brought these for you, dear," the elderly woman said with a warm smile. "I thought you might enjoy them. I hope I'm not disturbing your exercise routine." Zara accepted the cookies gratefully, touched by the kind gesture. "Thank you so much, and don't worry about the noise. I'm just practicing some cultural activities for my research." Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. "Oh, you're in college. I understand. My grandson is always doing strange things for his classes too. Just try to keep it down after 10 o'clock if you can." After Mrs. Chen left, Zara realized she needed to be more careful about the noise she was making. She started putting down yoga mats and blankets to muffle the sounds of her practice sessions. As the weeks passed, Zara became more and more confident in her understanding of doggy style. She had studied every aspect of canine behavior she could find, and she felt ready to demonstrate her knowledge when the right opportunity arose. Little did she know that this opportunity would come sooner than expected, and in the most embarrassing way possible. The invitation came on a Thursday afternoon. Dr. Rodriguez was hosting a dinner party at her home for graduate students and visiting researchers. It was meant to be a casual gathering where everyone could meet and share their research interests. "I think it would be wonderful for you to meet some of the other students," Dr. Rodriguez told Zara as they walked across campus. "They're all doing fascinating work in different areas of anthropology and cultural studies." Zara felt excited about the opportunity. She had been looking forward to sharing her research with other academics who would appreciate her dedication to understanding human culture. She had prepared a mental presentation about her findings on human-canine relationships and the importance of doggy style in human society. That evening, she dressed carefully in what she thought was appropriate academic attire. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a small notebook, in case she needed to take notes during conversations. She had also brought the collar she had been using in her practice sessions, thinking it might be useful as a demonstration tool. Dr. Rodriguez's house was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. The other guests were already there when Zara arrived, and she could hear the sound of animated conversation coming from the living room. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Zara," Dr. Rodriguez announced as they entered the room. "She's our visiting researcher from overseas, and she's been doing some fascinating work on human-animal relationships." The group welcomed her warmly. There was Ben, a PhD student studying marriage customs in different cultures. Lisa was researching communication patterns in small communities. David was working on a project about modern social rituals, and Amanda was studying how traditions change over time. They all seemed genuinely interested in Zara's research, and she felt comfortable sharing some of her observations about human behavior. The conversation flowed easily as they discussed various aspects of culture and society. "It's amazing how much we can learn about a culture by studying their relationship with animals," Lisa commented during dinner. "Dogs especially seem to hold Such a special place in human society. Absolutely, Zara agreed enthusiastically. I've been studying that very topic. The bond between humans and dogs has created some truly fascinating cultural practices. Ben looked interested. What kind of practices are you talking about? Zara felt this was the perfect opportunity to share her research. Well, for example, there's this practice called doggy style that seems to be quite important in human culture. Though it's not often discussed openly, the room suddenly became very quiet. Everyone stopped eating and looked at Zara with expressions she couldn't quite read. She thought they must be impressed by her knowledge of this obscure cultural practice. I've been studying it for weeks, she continued, not noticing the shocked looks round the table. It appears to be a way for humans to honor their connection with dogs and learn from their natural behaviors. David nearly choked on his wine. I'm sorry. Did you say you've been studying it for weeks? Oh yes, Zara said proudly. I've read dozens of books about canine behavior, visited dog parks, and even volunteered at the animal shelter. I've learned so much about how dogs communicate and interact with each other. Amanda's eyes were wide with disbelief. And you think, this is cultural practice? Definitely, Zara nodded, from what I've observed. It seems to involve humans adopting certain canine behaviors and postures. It's really quite fascinating from an anthropological perspective. Dr. Rodriguez had gone very pale. Zara, I think there might be some confusion about, but Zara was too excited to be stopped. Actually, I've been practicing myself. I've gotten quite good at it. Would you like me to demonstrate? Before anyone could respond, Zara stood up from the table. She had been waiting for this moment to show off her research. She got down on her hands and knees on the dining room floor, assuming the position she had been practicing for weeks. You see, she said, looking up at the stunned faces around the table. The key is to maintain the proper posture while communicating through body language. Just like dogs do. She began to demonstrate the movements she had learned, crawling around on the floor and making the soft barking sounds she had been practicing. She even pulled out the collar from her bag and put it on, thinking it would help illustrate her point. The collar is an important part of the ritual. She explained, still on all fours. It seems to represent the connection between human and canine consciousness. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Zara's demonstration. Everyone was staring at her with expressions of shock, confusion, and barely contained laughter. This is how dogs establish dominance and submission. In their social groups, Zara continued, completely oblivious to the reaction she was getting. And humans have adapted this into their own cultural practices. She continued her demonstration for several more minutes, showing different positions and movements she had learned. She was proud of how much she had improved since her first attempts. Weeks ago, finally, she stood up and brushed off her dress, looking at her audience with satisfaction. As you can see, it's quite a complex practice that requires a lot of preparation and understanding. The silence in the room was deafening. Ben was staring at his plate, his shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Lisa had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with amazement. David was looking at Dr. Rodriguez with an expression that seemed to say, "Are you seeing this?" Dr. Rodriguez stood up slowly, her face a mixture of concern and embarrassment. "Zara, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" They went into the kitchen, leaving the other guests sitting in stunned silence. Dr. Rodriguez closed the door and turned to face Zara, trying to figure out how to handle this delicate situation. "Zara," she said gently, "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the phrase you've been researching." "A misunderstanding?" Zara looked confused. "But I've been so careful with my research. I've studied every aspect of canine behavior I could find." Dr. Rodriguez took a deep breath. "The thing is, when people say doggy style, they're not talking about a cultural practice involving dogs. They're talking about, well, it's a term that refers to a specific position used in intimate relationships between humans." Zara's face went blank as she processed this information. "Intimate relationships? Yes." Dr. Rodriguez said carefully. "It's a term used to describe a particular way that couples express their affection for each other physically. It has nothing to do with dogs or spiritual practices. The realization hit Zara like a lightning bolt. All those conversations she had overheard, all the research she had done, all the practice sessions in her apartment, all the books about dog behavior, the collar, the demonstrations at the animal shelter, everything suddenly made horrible sense. Her face turned bright red, and she felt like she might faint. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, no, no. It's okay," Dr. Rodriguez said quickly. "It's just a misunderstanding. These things happen when you're learning about a new culture." But Sarah was already imagining how this would look to everyone. She had just crawled around on the floor in front of a group of graduate students, barking and wearing a collar, thinking she was demonstrating an important cultural practice. "I need to go," she said, her voice barely audible. "I need to go right now." She rushed back through the living room, grabbed her bag, and headed for the door. The other guests were still sitting there, not sure what to say or do. "Zara, wait," Dr. Rodriguez called after her. But she was already out the door and running down the street toward her apartment. Back in the dining room, the silence finally broke. "Well," Ben said, "that was definitely the most interesting dinner party I've ever been to." The others burst into laughter, not because they were mean, but because the situation had been so unexpected and innocent at the same time. "Poor girl," Lisa said, wiping tears from her eyes. She really thought she was doing academic research. "The dedication, though," David added. "She studied for weeks. She went to the animal shelter. She bought books. That's commitment to scholarship." Dr. Rodriguez came back into the room, looking worried. "I should go check on her. She was so embarrassed. Give her a little time," Amanda suggested. "She probably needs to process what just happened." As the evening wound down, the guests couldn't stop talking about what they had witnessed. It would become a story they would tell for years to come. But they all agreed that Zara's earnest dedication to understanding what she thought was human culture was actually quite touching, even if it had been based on a complete misunderstanding. Zara spent the entire weekend hiding in her apartment, too embarrassed to face anyone. She had disconnected her phone and closed all the curtains. Every time she thought about what had happened at the dinner party, she felt her face burn with shame. On her home planet, making such a mistake would have been considered a serious failure. Her people valued precision and accuracy above all else. The fact that she had misunderstood something so fundamental about human culture made her question everything she thought she knew. She sat on her floor, surrounded by all the dog books and training materials she had collected over the past few weeks. Now they seemed like evidence of her foolishness rather than serious research tools. She had been so confident, so sure that she was uncovering an important aspect of human society. Monday morning came, and Zara knew she couldn't hide forever. She had classes to attend and research to complete. More importantly, she had to face Dr. Rodriguez and somehow find a way to continue her mission despite this humiliating setback. She dressed carefully, trying to look as normal and academic as possible. She packed away all the dog-related materials in her apartment, shoving them into boxes and hiding them in her closet. She never wanted to see them again. When she arrived at the university, she felt like everyone was staring at her. Of course, most students had no idea what had happened at the dinner party, but Zara's heightened sensitivity made her feel like her embarrassment was visible to everyone. Dr. Rodriguez was waiting for her in the anthropology department office. She looked up when Zara knocked on the door, and her expression was kind but concerned. "Zara, please come in," she said gently. "How are you feeling?" Mortified, Zara admitted, sitting down heavily in the chair across from Dr. Rodriguez's desk. "I've never been so embarrassed in my entire life." "Listen," Dr. Rodriguez said, leaning forward with a warm smile. "What happened on Friday night was completely understandable. You're studying a foreign culture, and misunderstandings are part of the learning process. But I was so wrong about everything," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I spent weeks researching, practicing, preparing. I thought I was being so thorough and scientific." "You were being thorough," Dr. Rodriguez pointed out. Your methodology was actually quite impressive. You observed, you researched, you practiced. Those are all the right steps for cultural study. You just had some incorrect initial information." Zara looked up, surprised by this perspective. "You don't think I'm a complete failure as a researcher?" "Not at all," Dr. Rodriguez said firmly. "In fact, I think this experience has taught you something very valuable about the complexity of human language and culture. Our expressions and idioms can be incredibly confusing, even to native speakers sometimes." This conversation was the beginning of Zara's real education about human communication. Dr. Rodriguez suggested that she audit a course on human linguistics and cultural interpretation. She also recommended that Zara meet with Dr. Patricia Williams, a professor who specialized in the study of euphemisms in indirect language. Dr. Williams was a fascinating woman in her 60s who had spent her career studying how people use language to talk about topics they find difficult or embarrassing. When Dr. Rodriguez explained Zara's situation, Dr. Williams was intrigued rather than amused. "Your experience is actually a perfect example of why my field of study is so important," Dr. Williams told Zara during their first meeting. "Human beings have developed incredibly complex ways of talking about certain topics, without saying what they really mean." "But why do they do that?" Zara asked. "Wouldn't it be easier to just say what you mean directly?" Dr. Williams smiled. "That's the million-dollar question. Sometimes it's because the topic is considered private or embarrassing. Sometimes it's because direct language might be considered rude or inappropriate in certain settings. And sometimes it's just because indirect language has become part of the culture." Under Dr. Williams' guidance, Zara began to study the fascinating world of human euphemisms, slang, and indirect communication. She learned about double meanings, cultural context, and the way language evolved to help people navigate socially sensitive topics. She discovered that doggy style was just one of hundreds of euphemisms that humans use to discuss intimate relationships. There were phrases like hitting a home run, going all the way, and getting to third base that had nothing to do with sports, but everything to do with romance. The more she studied, the more amazed she became by the complexity of human communication. On her home planet, people said exactly what they meant when they meant it. But humans had developed this intricate system of hints, suggestions, and coded language that required a deep understanding of cultural context to interpret correctly. She started keeping a journal of all the euphemisms and indirect expressions she encountered. She wrote down not just the phrases themselves, but the context in which they were used, the tone of voice people employed, and the reactions they received from their listeners. Her research took on a new depth and purpose. Instead of just observing human behavior, she was now studying the subtle art of human communication. She learned about regional differences in language, generational gaps in slang usage, and the way different social groups develop their own forms of coded speech. Dr. Williams introduced her to other researchers who were working on similar projects. She met linguists who studied how languages evolved, sociologists who examined the relationship between language and social structure, and psychologists who investigated why people chose indirect communication over direct expression. The other graduate students, who had witnessed her embarrassing demonstration at the dinner party, became some of her closest friends and collaborators. Instead of making fun of her mistake, they admired her dedication to learning and her willingness to bounce back from embarrassment. Ben, the student who had been studying marriage customs, started sharing his own research about how different cultures approach discussions of intimacy and relationships. Lisa, who studied communication patterns, helped Zara understand the subtle social cues that accompanied indirect language. "You know what's amazing about your story?" Lisa told her one afternoon as they sat in the library. "You approached your research with such genuine curiosity and dedication. Most people would have given up after an embarrassment like that." "I couldn't give up," Zara replied. "I came here to learn, and I realized I was just scratching the surface of how complex human communication really is." As the weeks passed, Zara's understanding of human culture deepened in ways she never could have imagined. She learned that the embarrassing mistake had actually been a gift, opening her eyes to layers of meaning and complexity she might never have discovered otherwise, she began writing a paper about her experience, focusing on the challenges that foreign researchers face when studying cultures with complex systems of indirect communication. She wrote about the importance of understanding context, the dangers of literal interpretation, and the value of making mistakes as part of the learning process. Her professors were impressed by the depth and insight of her work. Dr. Rodriguez nominated her paper for a prestigious Student Research Award, and Dr. Williams invited her to present her findings at a conference on cross-cultural communication. But perhaps the most important lesson Zara learned was about the value of humility. In research, she realized that approaching a new culture with too much confidence could lead to serious misunderstandings. The best researchers were those who remained open to being wrong, who asked questions when they were uncertain, and who viewed mistakes as opportunities for deeper learning. On her last day at the university, Zara organized a small gathering for all the people who had helped her during her research. She wanted to thank them for their patience, their kindness, and their willingness to help her learn from her mistakes. When I first arrived here, she told the group, I thought I understood human culture pretty well. I had studied it from a distance, and I thought that was enough. But I learned that there's a difference between studying something and actually living it. She looked around the room at the faces of her friends and mentors. My biggest mistake taught me my most valuable lesson. It showed me that real understanding comes not from assuming you know everything, but from being willing to admit when you don't know something and asking for help. As she prepared to return to her home planet, Zara felt proud of what she had accomplished. She had not only completed her original mission of studying human culture, but she had also made a contribution to the field of cross-cultural communication that would help other researchers avoid similar misunderstandings. Her final report would become a landmark study in the field of anthropology, not because she had made groundbreaking discoveries about human behavior, but because she had documented the importance of cultural humility and the value of learning from mistakes. Her story would be told to future researchers as an example of how the most embarrassing moments can become the most valuable learning experiences. And somewhere in her apartment, packed away in boxes, were all those dog training books that had started her on this incredible journey of discovery. She had decided to keep them as a reminder that even the most well-intentioned research can lead you in unexpected directions, and that the willingness